What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to another edition of the Jays for Days podcast. I'm Josh. He's Josh. We got Jays Jumpers, Jaron Jackson Jr.'s, John Morant's, Joe Johnson's, John Raff's, of course. We've got Jays, we've got them for days. We've got them in person, and we've got them on video.
How about that?
Josh, how you doing?
You know, hasn't been the greatest week. Lots of tragic passings in college basketball. Country in turmoil again.
Right.
But I must say I did enjoy getting to sort of escape with the NBA draft. And yes, we now have video. We're going to be on YouTube. There are positives in this dark time.
Yes. Please bear with us in our clearly makeshift video set here. We're working on it, okay? Be patient with
One
us.
step at a time.
We very much appreciate that. But as we kind of do this more and more, we'll get things kind of more set in and go from there. Of course, if you're listening to just the audio version, that will always be there. Very much if you're a podcast, you have to put just as much effort into the audio as some of the other digital content stuff that we want to try and do kind of into the summer and as we move towards the 2022-23 season. But, okay, do you consider the draft the beginning of the year or the end of it?
Beginning, absolutely.
Because I think technically it's the end of the NBA's calendar.
I think you're right, because the actual transaction
And then free agency
is the start
of next year.
I think you're right.
But you're right, it just kind of seems like that the best way to start the year is to get some new players.
Right. Why would the players who worked in the NBA signal the end of that NBA season? That makes no sense.
The new guys coming in signal.
Yes. And Adam Silver said something about that in his opening remarks last night of closing the book on 2021-22.
Yeah.
So I think the commissioner feels the same way.
I think so too. It just kind of makes sense. It just kind of makes sense. But 2022 NBA draft last night, 58 picks, not 60, because of tampering, right?
Yeah.
Whatever.
Gotta love it.
So, I was explaining to somebody last night, why would they do that? I was like, probably because when you miss out on the middle of the second round pick, if you get a guy you were trying to get and the price you have to pay apart is just like some guy from Europe that may or may not make it to the NBA at some point, it's kind of a price worth paying.
Right. And it was what, the Bucks and the Heat?
Yeah.
You're probably drafting and stashing guys anyway, like you said.
Right.
I mean, it's not like there are a lot of roster spots available on those two teams. They're quite good.
Speaking of the Bucks, did you see that Grayson Murray got signed a two-way deal with the Bucks? That's a very two-way deal. That's a very Bucks move as far as I'm concerned. But kind of has a Sam Merrill kind of vibe. Not the same player, but the same kind of vibe. But 2022 NBA draft. Before we kind of dig into the top of the draft, some of the overarching stuff, some favorite picks, some least favorite picks, all that fun stuff. Gut reaction to the way the draft went, whether it's the order, whether it's the movement. What was your feeling on draft night and kind of the vibe you were feeling as we're going through the hours of picks last night?
My thing was, this is the most logical draft I've ever seen. I was looking for places where I didn't like picks.
Mm-hmm.
Couldn't find any, and we'll get into this later. And then all of a sudden, right there at the back, last 7 or so picks of the first round, we decided now is the time to draft all of these guys who didn't do anything in college and are these big long-term projects and all of your patented potential raw athleticism guys.
Right.
Just out of nowhere, they just all started going off the board, and that's where I started having some issues. But that was my big thing, is I was just going team by team. That makes sense. I like that. That's a good fit. There wasn't anything. Usually there's a pick or two that I have a real issue with, whether it's personally from a fit perspective of I wanted that player somewhere else, or I don't know what that team was thinking doing that.
Right.
I mean, the Knicks are going to be the Knicks, but if that's the talking point we're coming out of, is the fact they traded all of these picks for other picks and cleared some cap space to potentially go after Jalen Brunson, and that's the big, what are they doing out of the draft? To me, that means everybody had a pretty good night.
Yeah. I feel so bad for Knicks fans because as a longtime Grizzlies fan, Chris Wallace was we were at the mercy of Chris Wallace for years when it came to the draft, and now King Kleiman, he just does whatever he wants, and we're like, oh, you want Jake LaRavia? Oh, like, kind of thought you'd be able to get him at least at 22, if not at 29, but
right.
you want to trade up to 19 to get him? That's fine. Let's do it.
Jump back to the first round for David Roddy.
Right. That's fine. Did you see the reaction video from David Roddy?
No.
It's fantastic. You have to look it up. But it is.
He seems like a cool
just
guy.
the raw emotion of, and he's not in the green room. He's not there at the Barclays Center. He's somewhere surrounded by a bunch of people who are only there to root for him. So those are the coolest videos as far as I'm concerned. But yeah, I think you're. And maybe it was just the draft class, but there are a lot of guys at the top of the draft that there weren't guys sneaking into the very tippity top of this draft that it's like, that guy, you're really drafting his potential. Like there are some, I think to a certain extent when you're talking about like the Ignite guys like Shaedon Sharpe, specifically Dyson Daniels and Shaedon Sharpe, two of the guys to go in the top 10 of the draft that didn't play college basketball. Mm-hmm. Apart from those, but like if that's what we're talking about in terms of potential at the top of the draft, then it's a pretty proven core of guys, and you had multiple the sophomore slump in terms of the college guys was not a thing. I mean, right? You had your one and dones at the top of the draft, but you had your Jaden Ivey, Keegan Murray, and Johnny Davis, who all as freshmen were not going to be lottery picks, and then after insane sophomore years, kind of with the ball in their hands more. They slip into the lottery and very, very quickly in the college basketball series, like, that guy's probably a lottery pick.
Yeah. 3 of the best 5 players in the Big Ten? Maybe 3 of the 4?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's fair. But let's, top of the draft, best place to start?
Yeah.
So we'll start, in general, the first 5 picks were the first 5 guys that we expected to come off the board.
Yep.
The reports, the conversation leading up to the draft painted a different picture. But the 5 guys that were picked, that came off the board first, were the guys we were expecting to come off the board first. It ended up going in the order that follows Paolo Banchero. For a while, it was, Jabari Smith, even like up until draft day yesterday. Mm-hmm. Woj was reporting, the top 3 is locked in, and Jabari Smith's going to go 1, right. Chet Holmgren's going to go 2, and Paolo's going to go 3.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because it was clear, and the Thunder made it clear last night, that Chet was their guy.
Yep.
So it didn't matter who went 1. As long as it wasn't Chet, they were going to pick Chet at 2. So instead of it being Jabari, Chet, Paolo, which it seemed to be the way it was going to go, then, and it's interesting, you look at, and I heard about this some on Thursday, like the sports books, for as much as people thought Jabari was going to go 1, the sports books never really mirrored that. It looked much closer and much less of a foregone conclusion. But really, right before the draft, there was Woj, there was Shams reporting of, it looks like Paolo's going to be the guy at number 1.
And then I don't know if it was before or after, but the books also went in that. It was
right.
Everything was going momentum towards Paolo.
And then by the time the first pick was made, around 8:15 or whatever, it was pretty clear it was going to be Paolo. That's who it ends up being for Orlando. Chet goes 2 to Oklahoma City, which proves, as I just said, that Oklahoma, the Thunder had their guy. It didn't matter what was going to happen there. So instead of Jabari going 1, which is what the conversation we thought we were going to have for the last couple weeks, he goes 3 because the Thunder got the guy that they wanted at 2. Anyways, what say you about the top 3 picks? Of course, at this point, anybody who's like, I don't really love the fit of, I wish that Orlando would have gotten the shooting of Jabari Parker. I don't care about fit at the top of the draft. Draft the guy that you think is the best player. If the Orlando Magic came to that conclusion, then I'm all for it. But what do you think about how it shaped up?
And it's kind of weird because they're basically going to all play the same position. Mm-hmm. Now, they're very different players.
That's a good point. I never really thought about that, but you're right.
Right? If there's one concern or criticism about Chet, it is not physically that he can... It's not a concern about him physically being able to handle the NBA. Mm-hmm. It's about him being able to guard DeAndre Ayton.
Right.
Or insert other ginormous human being who plays center.
Right.
That's the concern. If you have somebody else to do that, it makes more sense to play him at the 4, which is where Paolo is going to play, and it's where Jabari Smith is going to play. So it's kind of strange because usually it's sort of a guard, wing, big, or something like that you're trying to pick between.
Right.
Jay Bill has said it, and I completely agree. You've got 3 number 1 picks. You just choose which one you feel like either you're the highest on, you have the most confidence in their ceiling, you have the most confidence in their floor, or they have that one thing that stands out that appeals to you most.
Right.
And it seems Orlando decided the offensive polish of Paolo is what we want. I have absolutely no issue with it. I don't think they made a mistake. They could have picked any three of them, and I would have been saying the exact same thing. But from a fit perspective, if I'm ranking them, Paolo is one for me because he can play the three.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, he gives you something a little bit different. He's more perimeter oriented than either Chet or Jabari. And so you get some playmaking, and I think he can sort of integrate himself a little bit easier with all of these other pieces the Magic have.
Mm-hmm.
Not that any of them would be an issue, and I'm with you that we're not talking about fit. But when you have three guys and you feel really good about all of them, and depending on the team, probably all three of them would have been taken first overall by somebody.
Agreed.
You got to find some way to differentiate between them. And so if I'm pulling teeth and sort of really nitpicking this, to me, Paolo makes the most sense for Orlando.
You know, I think, like you said, top three guys in different drafts, they all go number
Yeah.
one. And, you know, I think all three of those teams are kind of in a spot now. And Houston may be a little bit further behind. But the conversation I kept having, you know, Oklahoma City killing the draft. Even you said something on Twitter about it. And then my kind of response is Orlando now. I mean, Orlando, when you look at their starting lineup, their starting lineup looks something like this. Cole Anthony, Paolo Banchero, Franz Wagner, Jonathan Isaac, and
Mo Bamba,
and
potentially.
Mo Bamba, Wendell Carter Jr.
Yeah.
You know, that's a roster that I need immediately to start looking like it's going to win some basketball games. It doesn't have to. I'm not saying they have to go 50-32 this year. I'm not saying they have to go over 500 this year. But them and Oklahoma City Thunder, at some point, you know, we talk about, you know, they come into a place with no pressure, and for the most part, those three teams have very little pressure. Nobody's expecting them to win immediately, but at some point, Orlando's kind of been up there in that area for, you know, half a decade now.
And gives up whenever they get close.
Right.
Maybe not give up, but right.
But
you
there's
never feel like they're actually on a trajectory towards becoming a true contender.
Right.
Yeah.
Evan Fournier and Nikola Vucevic only get you so far.
Right, and then you trade them and you try again.
Right.
Yeah.
And just kind of looking and searching for the Dwight Howard, Rashard Lewis, Jameer Nelson, Hito Turkoglu team to get you, you know, kind of over the hump. But the point being is that and maybe not Houston, maybe I'm talking more Orlando and Oklahoma City. But as much as Oklahoma City and Sam Presti have been praised for their ability to turn guys that they don't really want anymore into draft capital, I mean, you can really go all the way back to, like, turning Russell Westbrook into all of this. Like, that's kind of what we're talking about here, right?
Even starting with the Paul George to a certain extent, yeah.
Sure, right.
Yeah.
It's impressive what they've done. At some point, you got to start winning basketball games, because at this point now you have a guy that, when you talk about who are some of the best players, young players in the NBA, SGA is always in that conversation.
Yep.
Josh Giddey quickly last year established himself as a guy at least worthy, if nothing else, of being in that conversation. And now you add a guy like Chet, and like at some point you have to turn it into some sort of product on the floor. And the other part of this that I just hope is the thing is that at some point you got to stop tanking. And I really hope this is kind of the year, because maybe they really do have that in place. And now the shift next year is, okay, let's win some freaking basketball games. Like, at some point, let's win some basketball games. And so we kind of start to see them turn that page. But as far as the top three guys go, I wasn't going to fault anybody. Whoever, you know, ended up getting, you know, who it was at 3, somebody was going to end up with the quote-unquote last guy remaining. Jabari Smith being the last guy remaining is not.
He did not look pleased about it.
No, he did not. He was not. He did not look happy about it. But certainly it was kind of, you know, I'm sure internally those front offices, there's a best case scenario and a worst case scenario, I suppose. But it feels like 2 of the 3 teams got their best case scenario, and that's kind of the mercy you're at number 3 if you're picking third. But I think I would like to see those teams use this, at least if it looks like those guys are going to pan out into actually, you know, playing some basketball games with the intent of winning, not just getting a high draft pick. And I don't know if that translates into more pressure or not, but I do find that interesting, because those are some teams that have kind of been running on the wheel with draft capital for a while now. And when you all get a guy that could have been the number 1 overall pick, in theory, you guys are all in a pretty good situation.
And you can argue all 3 teams got what they wanted, because Jabari Smith was the projected number 1 overall pick for a long time, and Houston got him at 3. Who knows exactly how they would have wanted that to pan out if they could have picked how those three pieces fell. But yeah, absolutely. And to me, the thing with the Thunder is, and I texted you this, and I just love getting excited about the future and the idea of these players playing together. But now you have three pieces that fit very well together. You have a guard, a wing, and a big, all of which are interchangeable, can do multiple things, variety of skill sets, versatile, can guard multiple positions, all of that good stuff. And you've got a playmaker, you've got a primary ball handler, and you've got whatever you want to describe Chet as. This thing we haven't seen.
Right.
They complement each other so well. And of course, you've got all of these other picks coming down the pipeline. But is this where I get to go on my Thunder tangent for a second?
Yeah, go ahead.
So, second, to your point about trying to win, you're not going to be able to roster all of these picks that you have. So they did start spending some of them to go get Ousmane Dieng, at which point I freaked out because I thought they had traded 12. But no, they just traded extra future picks to go get 11 and kept 12. And 12, they took Jalen Williams. Didn't think he was going to go that high, but you started hearing back into the lottery. I'm telling you, that guy's going to be a stud. To come away with those two pieces, and one of the more intriguing prospects in the draft in Dieng. Again, who knows what he actually turns into? It's going to take time, but you're the Oklahoma City Thunder. You have time. I mean, they won it right there, to me. That, end of story. And then you still also have the opportunity. Look, I didn't like the Peyton Watson pick. We can get into this more later. I have no questions. But again, if somebody's going to take a swing, it should be the Thunder. And then you got Jalen Williams, number 2, who I'm a huge fan of. He's going to be a specialty guy. His upside is not all that high. But that dude just plays really hard and is a menace. When you're trying to instill a winning culture and turn this from a project to a success story and a competitive team, you need guys like that.
Which is the biggest hurdle that the Thunder have to overcome in the next 36 or so months.
Right.
Is since Durant left, this is not a winning culture.
No.
Especially
you had the Chris Paul year.
Right.
Where Chris Paul brought them.
Right, okay.
But outside of
yes. To be fair to Chris Paul, yes.
Yeah, but that was exclusive to Chris Paul.
Right, that is a direct byproduct of Chris Paul being on your basketball team. I mean, literally your GM is known for how good he is at getting a bunch of picks high in the draft.
Right.
Not building he's not Bob Myers, he's not, he's not, not a GM, but he's not Popovich, who's just responsible for 2+ decades of Spurs relevancy. Bob Myers somehow, and when you talk about what the Warriors did, but somehow the Warriors always seem to be in the mix when they're not hurt, and then when they draft a person, they're like, oh yeah, I kind of like that, and they've turned themselves. Their culture is so much winning that when they draft a guy like Pat Baldwin Jr., it's like, oh, what a great place for Pat Baldwin Jr.
There's not a better spot for him to land in the NBA.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's a testament to them. So when it comes to the Thunder, when you have that many draft picks, you're going to hit enough times to have enough talent. It's more than likely going to happen. Or at least hit enough times to put yourself in a position to then trade up the rest of them to go and get one more guy that is proven. But winning is not something that happens overnight, even if you have a team that is capable of winning.
Correct.
We can spend an entire podcast talking about the teams in the NBA who have tried to manifest a culture of winning by going and getting guys that are really good.
Yeah.
And as we see over and over and over again, unless your team has a guy named LeBron James on your team, it's not really that simple.
And it even took the Warriors a while. If you want to talk about building through the draft, I mean that's the best comparison to what the Thunder are trying to do.
Right.
The Thunder are even a more extreme version of it, and of course the Warriors didn't sort of tank excessively to get these picks.
Right.
But the team wasn't a championship team overnight.
No.
It took a little while, and then all of a sudden they figured it out, and they haven't really stopped winning since.
And with all the super team talk, the only super teams that have worked are teams that involve LeBron James, and LeBron James is a culture in and of himself, and that everywhere else it's Giannis and the Bucks. It's Toronto that was knocking on the door forever, and then they get a superstar in Kawhi in the right year, and they break through finally. It's the Warriors over and over and over again. It's the Spurs. Even the Heat initially, they were so freaking good that it didn't matter eventually. But even at the beginning, it was like, yeah, that was kind of tougher once Bosh, Wade, and LeBron all got there. It was tougher than we thought it was going to be.
They were bad at the beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, all that to say, right, and it's not like the Thunder are going to be contending for championships anytime soon. At least that would be unexpected if in the next couple of years it's like, yeah, that team is really good, not going to be fun to play in the West. But
what Ja did.
Just a job. Okay, can we talk about let's that's a fantastic transition. 4 and 5. Keegan Murray at 4.
Yeah.
Jaden Ivey at 5. When you look back on it, Jaden Ivey worked out for 2 teams. He worked out for the Orlando Magic at 1 and the Detroit Pistons at 5.
Yeah.
He made it pretty clear that he didn't want to go to Sacramento. And,
good for him.
And somehow, and I don't know if the Kings were, if it was like, yeah, you know what, we just kind of talked ourselves into Keegan Murray, or if it's, oh, okay, we only talked ourselves, we found a way to talk ourselves into Keegan Murray because we knew Jaden Ivey didn't want to be here. Who knows what actually the motivation behind the Keegan Murray pick is when you talk about the roster makeup in Sacramento with what they already have in the backcourt. They needed a wing to go with the De'Aaron Fox, Domantas Sabonis, Davion Mitchell kind of thing they got going on there. Rashawn Holmes. They needed somebody to kind of sit in the middle in between those two, and Keegan Murray's going to get it done on both ends of the floor. I have no doubt about that. Maybe when it comes to ceiling, that Keegan Murray in the top 5 is pretty by a decent margin the 5th guy in terms of the highest ceiling out of the top 5 guys picked. But in terms of a guy that I feel really confident in being able to do what he's going to be asked to do in the NBA, Keegan Murray I'm pretty confident in. So who knows what actually happened there. But instead of it going 4 Jaden Ivey, 5 Keegan Murray, we got the inverse and Ivey. All of a sudden, one of my favorite backcourts in the NBA because we talked about this.
Yeah.
Jaden Ivey did not need any making teammates better responsibility. Cade Cunningham's going to take care of all of that. Just kind of let him do his thing athletically. And when you look at it, break it down, I kind of like the way it ended up for both of those teams.
I don't know if it was just because of the Ivey family's ties to Detroit that he tried to get himself out of going to Sacramento, or if he just had the awareness to understand that was not a good place for me to develop.
It's hard to give any flack to Jaden Ivey for not wanting to go to Sacramento.
Absolutely.
Not that I was trying to.
Yeah, no. Just, I don't know what it was, but if he actually said, I don't think this is where I should be, got to give him props for that. Whether you feel it's actually right or wrong for a player to behave that way, that says something about him if he's able to sort of figure that out beforehand. Right. And I liked and this is where we can get into how logical these picks were. Because I like what the Kings did outside of the fact that Jaden Ivey also liked what the Kings did.
Uh-huh.
Because I don't want another ball handler that I don't know what he does off the ball, but he's not actually a point guard. When you just drafted
doesn't especially make his teammates better.
Right. I don't know exactly what he is when he doesn't have the ball in his hands.
Right.
So go give me the accomplished 3-level scorer who also plays defense, because this team doesn't have, at least in the pieces you would expect to be part of any kind of successful Kings teams moving forward, they don't have that pure scorer, right? It's the speed and athleticism of Fox. It's the overall playmaking and skill set Sabonis brings. That was hard to say. Right, he's certainly a capable scorer. He's going to give you 18 a night. Mm-hmm. But what makes him special is that it's 18, 8, and 6. Right? You don't have the guy who's just going to sit there on the three-point line or who's going to be able to attack closeouts and just score. That's what Keegan Murray does. Right. So I love that fit. And we've talked about the Ivies of Detroit thing. To me, that was the best place. The only place I would feel somewhat confident it's actually he's going to reach his potential. Mm-hmm. And then you keep going down the list. You would have to think the Pacers would have taken him at 6 if he was there. But you get another uber-athletic shooter in Ben McMathurin. And then the Blazers. I tweeted this. I've said this before. If Shaedon Sharpe is there, you have to take him. You have to. That is your best hope of keeping Damian Lillard around for the rest of his career. You have to go for the home run. Whether that's
and if it doesn't work, you get to pick first again.
Right. And whether that's a Damian Lillard thing or a we're moving on from Damian Lillard thing.
Right.
Regardless, you need a franchise cornerstone.
Right.
Shaedon Sharpe can be that guy. To me, Keegan Murray can't. Ivy potentially could. So you're looking at 4. Mm-hmm. And to me, if you're sort of going down that power ranking of franchise cornerstone guys, Sharpe is probably 5 for me. So they did that. New Orleans picks up a defensive-minded facilitating point guard. Well, isn't that perfect considering their roster?
Mm-hmm.
You know, Johnny Davis at 10.
Did you see? So right, Bobby Marks on the lower third has team needs.
Yeah.
Did you see what one of New Orleans' team needs were? Healthy Zion Williamson.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Yes, that's exactly what they need.
Right.
When you look at their roster, you have, and to your point, a guy who's going to defend the best guard on the floor.
And he's big.
And he's huge, yeah. Best guard on the floor, can facilitate, kind of really work nicely next to CJ McCollum in the backcourt. And then when you look at the rest of that roster, in theory, the rest of that roster, if you want to go small, or if you want to go bigger, it's probably a Brandon Ingram, Zion Williamson when he's healthy, and then Valanciunas.
Yeah.
Or if you're going small, you've got a uber athletic, uber switchable defense with Dyson Daniels at the front of it, and then Herb Jones, Brandon Ingram, and Zion Williamson on the back end of it. And maybe that's a little undersized, but the point being is that when you kind of plug that hole that the Pelicans were trying to fill, and with a guy too that really shot up draft boards in the last couple weeks before the draft, then you really start to see what a team like that could look like, especially a team that just took gave the Suns much more trouble than we thought they were going to give the Suns in the Western Conference playoffs. Absolutely like what they did. Really quick before we get to like the Johnny Davises of the world and kind of that, can we stop the John Morant Jaden Ivey comparisons, please? I challenge you to give me a third prong past their hair and their athleticism that they are similar players.
Similar players. Because to me, my third problem would be the fact that Niele Ivey obviously coached John Morant at the beginning of his NBA career.
Okay, that's fine.
I mean, if I'm going for an NBA comparison, that's the first name that came to mind for me too. Do you have a better, I guess let me flip this to you. Do you have a better NBA comparison for Jaden Ivey?
No, I'm not interested in making a better one. But I am also interested in not making an inaccurate one.
Yes.
In what way, shape, or form has Jaden Ivey ever shown that he makes his teammates better?
Right, and that is
literally all that John Morant does. On top of being the most athletic, exciting player, maybe in the NBA right
now. Where they are extremely similar is it's a downhill, attack the basket, uber athleticism, blow by you game.
There's true, but I was frustrated by the lack of that differentiation.
Sure.
Because it was shades there are plenty of guys that are uber athletic in the NBA. And this is just me being a Memphis guy, and I will wholeheartedly admit that. But to suggest that to an NBA team the value that Jaden Ivey is going to bring off the bat is the same value that John Morant is going to bring is ludicrous.
Yes, and that is the big difference, and that's where you and I think are.
And there was too much of he's a John Morant type player. He is he's
60% of John Morant.
He's halfway.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So
and that's the question is. You look at him and you say, I can see how this guy becomes a superstar. But there is a huge gap and something he needs to prove, which is John Morant is a walking triple-double almost. It is, well, at least, let me rephrase that. In college, he was basically a walking triple-double.
Right.
Jaden Ivey was nowhere near that. He averaged, 3.5 assists, something like that? Right. That is the difference. Right. Jaden Ivey was never facilitating and creating an entire offense and orchestrating an entire offense the way John Morant does.
Which is why Detroit is fine.
Yes.
Because they have their walking triple-double guy in Cade Cunningham.
Right.
That is why it is perfect. And I don't need Jaden Ivey to become John Morant. That's not what this is about.
Right.
This is just about, when we look, John Morant is a superstar because of what he does with the ball in his hands and what he does for his teammates. Jaden Ivey could become a star. But I will believe when I see it, if him being a star, that a lot of that is making his teammates better. Because I think that's what Cade is there for.
Yep.
I think that's why the backcourt in Detroit makes so much sense with those two guys back there. I just needed to get that off of my chest.
If I were to throw in a second he's a mix of these two players, I almost feel like it's John Morant and Jalen Green. Right?
Okay.
There was a Troy Weaver was very, very interested in Jalen Green last year too. He got something similar, that score first, uber athletic guard, playmaker kind of guy, but not a orchestrator of an offense. That's right. That's what I'm right there with you. That was the first name that came to mind. If you're asking me, who does he remind me of?
Right. And that's totally fair.
Yeah.
From the connections to the way he just looks different athletically on the floor.
Yeah.
But somehow Ja finds a way to just make all of his teammates better. And watching him be a part of draft night, he was the one who called Kennedy Chandler. that's all of those things are cool. I can't get enough of Memphis Grizzlies. But right, okay. So like you mentioned, Benedict Thurin goes 6 to the Pacers. We're here in Indianapolis. People seem to be really, really happy about that. I'm not sure I'm ready to give Kevin Pritchard a ton of credit for taking the 6th best guy in the draft with the 6th overall pick.
Who may not even be the 6th best guy in the draft. It was certainly a justifiable pick. I have no issue with it. I'm just not enamored with him.
That's fine. I mean, with all due respect, what's the last number 6 pick that you were enamored with?
Right, no, that's fair. Yeah.
But in terms of, like, it really didn't, like, I didn't want them to bring Dyson Daniels in. I was a little worried about that from a, like, what is he going to do next to Tyrese Halliburton if he's not? Like, that's kind of...
We'll get to that later.
Right. So as long as you found a backcourt guy to pair with Tyrese Halliburton that made sense, I thought that was going to be a pick that made sense. That's why I would have been fine with Shaedon Sharpe. And someone tweeted today on Twitter, someone, personality here in Indianapolis, basically said, not word for word, but you just turned a Karis LeVert and Malcolm Brogdon backcourt into a Tyrese Halliburton and Benedict Mathurin backcourt. That's what a rebuild looks like. And to the credit of the Pacers, who clearly needed to do some sort of turn, pivoting, even if it's not a complete 180 rebuild, because I don't think people here would stand for a 180 like Oklahoma City Thunder tank type rebuild.
No, this is a retool.
But to retool that quickly in 6 months, going and get Tyrese Halliburton, and then drafting a guy like Mathurin in the first round, a good step for the Pacers. They get him at 6. Then you go to 7 with the Portland Trailblazers. We talked about that home run swing, Shaedon Sharpe. If he plays at Kentucky, that's one of those guys that kind of the AJ Griffin thing. If AJ Griffin's 1 year of college goes slightly different from a health perspective, of course, for Shaedon Sharpe, it's a
availability
perspective. We can have a conversation about why. Like, I heard some interesting things about was the guy scared to have his draft stock fall? Like, we can have that conversation if you'd like, but nonetheless, then Shaedon Sharpe at 7. Then we're moving down to 8. The Pelicans get Dyson Daniels in the top 10. The Spurs, Jeremy Sohan.
Yes.
Very much a Spurs guy.
Yep. And he's bigger than all of the other 6'4" 3-and-D guys they have. 6'5", 6'6".
Yes.
He gives you a power forward piece to play in there where you can put a Jakob Poeltl or whatever kind of center next to him, and all of these 3-and-D taller guards. And he can play power forward. He can guard on the perimeter. He might be the most capable player in this draft regarding 1 through 5.
Probably one of them, yeah.
I am a huge fan of, don't ask him to do too much, but when you need somebody like that, he's going to be fantastic for him. Really like that pick.
You know who the most underrated player in the NBA is?
Underrated?
Just in general.
DeJounte Murray?
Yeah. Do you know what DeJounte Murray averaged this year?
It's got to be something like 21.
Okay, 21. Give me the rest of it. Because the rest of it is
6 and 5?
21, 8, and 9.
Oh my. Yeah, I didn't think it was that high.
21, 8, and 9. And the point being is that, they've got a lot of guys there. We can have a conversation about, what is the blueprint, what kind of basketball team are you trying to build?
Right.
But at the very least, you had a guy that was a borderline, and maybe this is just me, I didn't have the most active NBA watching season that I've ever had. Much more, as we kind of pivoted this podcast to more college basketball, there was more focus on that. Then if I had the time to do it, it was college basketball, not NBA. But the point being is that guy almost averaged a triple-double, really close. And when you have a culture like that, and you just keep bringing in guys that you feel like are going to be NBA dudes, that you keep moving in the right direction. And we're talking about a team that was supposed to be out of it.
Yep.
And
they always find a way to
made moves at the trade deadline like they thought they were out of it, like getting rid of Derek White, sending him to Boston, and then they were right there. In the play-in, competitive for the play-in. It's just kind of waiting for it. At some point, the Spurs, we're just going to look up, and the Spurs are going to be unexpectedly even if it's nothing blow your socks off, they're going to be 15-7 through 22 games, and you're going to be like, oh, here they are. At some point, they were going to figure it out.
Yeah.
And this was, this is when they actually did. So at some point, that's going to happen. And Sohan, I got questions about right being able to guard 1 through 5 is a plenty good place to start. But as a guy who religiously watched Tony Allen for years, the offensive development is a important part of him.
Now,
being
I would
able
argue
to,
he's already a better shooter than Tony Allen.
And that was a principle of the thing. Not actually comparing the two.
His ceiling is limited unless the offense really develops.
Right. Because that is equally as important in a playoff series in the half court. You want a guy who can guard 1 through 5, but you need that guy to also like have the guy that's guarding him respect him in the corner, if nothing else.
And I mean, the one good thing is he's not going to get played off the floor in the sense of he's 7 feet tall.
Right, exactly.
He plays bigger than he is because of his athleticism, his strength, his physical build. Mm-hmm. And then Johnny Davis at 10. I think you had him picked in our mock draft at 10.
Did I?
I think so. I think you had the Wizards taking him.
It's the most Wizards pick of all time.
Yeah, I mean, there's not too much to say there. Then the 2 Oklahoma City picks, which then goes to Jalen Duren. And we don't have to sort of go through pick by pick at this point. But this was the other interesting one, is sort of the overall what the Pistons did. Mm-hmm. I really like Ivy in that situation. That makes all the sense in the world to me. And I like Duren too. My question is, does this have any impact on their pursuit of DeAndre Ayton? Mm-hmm. Because if you're going to go throw the max or something close to it at DeAndre Ayton in an attempt to somehow convince the Suns not to match an offer sheet or to get him in a sign-in trade, you just went back into the first round to get a backup? Because those two guys can't play on the floor together.
No.
And they're both limited. As good as Ayton is. Now, he is way more capable of staying on the floor in a playoff series than most guys. Especially if you have players like Kate Cunningham and Sadiq Bey who can guard anybody on the floor.
Right.
That's my only question. On the flip side, though, and where I'll defend the Pistons, is there is no guarantee DeAndre Ayton is going to be a Piston next year. So now, all of a sudden, if it doesn't happen for whatever reason, you have a guy who does many of the same things. He's not going to be DeAndre Ayton. He's not quite that dominant. But from a physical standpoint, he's pretty close, right? We don't see DeAndre Ayton very often. I feel like Jalen Duren has some of that in him. So I do like that aspect of it as well. And I don't know if you have any other thoughts on the Pistons.
No, I like Duren. That's the extent of it. I like Duren. I think going to Detroit will give him a chance to. And as I said with Duren in one of our pre-draft pods, don't ask him to be something he's not. I don't think Detroit was going to ask him to be something he's not, because they have guys to do all of those other things. But with that being said, I think that from what you saw at Memphis, right, he's got the intangibles and the tangibles of being a great defender in the NBA, and has decent touch around the rim. I think there's at least some room for expansion of his offensive game. Mm-hmm. Especially when you're in an offense that you kind of get to play off guys like Cunningham and, in theory, Ivy, and working in the pick and roll, that kind of thing. Being in the dunker spot is, I think, all of those things he'll be able to handle. So, in general, what the Pistons did, starting with Ivy, I'm fine with that. When you look at the guys that went right after him, it's not like there was a guy left there that I was like, man, I think you guys kind of missed.
Yeah. And my original thought when the Hornets picked him was, they just upgraded themselves because it was going to be Mark Williams and they got Jalen Duren instead. Right. And then you go, no, they did the smart thing. Look at the Hornets. Yeah. Have a pick they don't need because they know the Cavaliers behind them are not about to pick a center. Right. With all of the big dudes they have. Mm-hmm. So they went, okay, we're going to trade this thing because we're still going to get Mark Williams. Yeah. And then they got Mark Williams. Yeah. That's all they needed. Yeah. So that worked really well for them. We'll talk about them more in a little bit because I really like what they did overall. Mm-hmm. And, Ochai Agbaji rounds out the lottery. I think I picked him here in our mock draft of this is a team trying to sort of get to that next level, win a playoff series, become one of the top 4 or 5 teams in the East. Mm-hmm. He's the guy you can plug in and play right away. Right. Catch and shoot, 3-and-D kind of guy. No issues with that. Can I do my other rant about what happened at the end of the first round now? Real quick on Agbaji, a truly a really elite shooter, I think. Yes.
I don't think he quite gets
Yep.
the credit for how good of a shooter he is, and
because the whole attacking the basket thing wasn't there until last season.
right, and right, that's the idea of he went and became more of a well-rounded player, so it's not quite as much of he's a really good shooter.
Yeah.
That's a testament to Agbaji.
Right.
But I think he's a better shooter. Like, and his shooting was part of that's part of the reason he was drafted in the lottery. But it's a testament to him that he's as good of a shooter as he is, and I think that's almost flown under the radar a little bit.
For sure.
To the extent that it was talked about.
He was up there near AJ Griffin level. Yeah, absolutely.
And fills a spot nicely in what the Cavs need from right, because you were hoping when you drafted help me
Isaac Okoro?
Yes, Isaac Okoro. That he was gonna he was a defensive guy that was gonna create a shot, and that he was going to kind of grow into a 3-point shot, and there's been nothing of the sort.
And that's my thing with both him and Patrick Williams is I need to see something on offense.
Right.
That's why I was so sold on Scotty Barnes, because you saw what Scotty Barnes could do on offense. And you see the same thing with Agbaji, which is why I like this pick. He's not going to be a 20-point a game scorer.
Probably not.
But you know that dude's going to knock down threes, and if teams start running out and really starting to attack aggressively with closeouts, he's more than capable of getting to the rim.
Yeah.
You see the offensive game where he is going to be a viable threat teams have to pay attention to. And then you get everything else that comes with him that sort of made him the player he was before he took this jump last season.
Without a doubt. All right, give me the back end of the first round.
So we're going along, and there's so many logical picks here. It's just making sense. Finally, somebody decides drafting AJ Griffin's a good idea.
Real quick. No, sorry, go ahead. You haven't gotten to 19 yet. Just pause for a second on 19.
Okay. Why AJ Griffin fell to 16 is beyond me. I'm sure it had something to do with the injuries. Atlanta got a steal. Yes, I know he's not exactly what you want. He's not an elite defender. I don't care. That man's going to make Trae Young's life easier, and that's all that matters. Okay, 19.
19. Shouts to Jake LaRavia.
Yeah.
Shouts to and like I said, was I expecting the like I saw mock drafts with LaRavia going 29 to the Grizzlies.
Yeah. Oh yeah, he was pushing maybe the very end of the first round.
Right. Like there were the Star, the Indy Star, the local Gannett paper here in Indianapolis, was writing stories basically to the effect of LaRavia perhaps sneaking in the back end of the first round. And all I'll say about the Grizzlies trading up to 19 to once again for the second straight year get a guy that they probably could have gotten in their original position is I find Zach Kleinman, who makes all of the draft decisions in the Grizzlies front office, has more than accrued the benefit of the doubt when it comes to and I find it hard to believe that if he thought he could have gotten him at 22, that he would have traded up to 19 to get him.
Right.
If he and maybe it's just a gut feeling thing. Maybe he's got if there's even a 50% chance we don't get him at 22, I'm trading up to get him at 19.
No.
And we'll see how he fits in. Of course, a guy that can shoot it is always going to be nice for the Grizzlies to have come off their bench. So it was, I think, I had several people text me right as it was happening, reach, and I was like, okay, maybe, yeah, it might have been a reach, but at the very least, I love seeing, because then the Grizzlies traded back into the first round after giving up 29 to get David Roddy shortly after. I love seeing the Grizzlies be, have some conviction about guys in the draft, even mid to late first round where things sort of start to fizzle out. And it's yeah, cool, another guy drafted. And to show conviction and to make moves up to, because, I don't know if Zaire Williams will become the half-court creator that we need him to be, but I don't know that he's not.
Yeah.
And that's really all I was hoping to see from Zaire Williams this year, because that's what the Grizzlies need more than anything else. And what we learned in the playoffs was I need somebody who can stretch the floor in the half-court, knock down shots, and someone alongside Ja who can go and get his own shots. So, that's an aside, ultimately. But shouts to the Grizzlies. It's going to be a while before I dog anything the Grizzlies do on draft night with how good they've been the last 5 years. So.
And if nothing else, There were two free agency concerns. Two holes that would theoretically need to be filled. Now, maybe both of them end up not needing to be filled. Maybe both of them end up, maybe it's one or the other, but it's Tyus Jones and Kyle Anderson. So what did you do? You went and got yourself a fairly comparable replacement for Kyle Anderson. Of course, they're not the same player, but Jake LaRavia can absolutely do that. And then you went and got yourself a 5-star recruit who is a phenomenal defender at the point guard position. He's just small in Kennedy Chandler.
Right.
I'm a huge Kennedy Chandler fan. Don't ask him to do anything too spectacular, but can he absolutely become the next point guard who goes and gets himself Jalen Brunson money as one of the top backup point guards in the league that all of a sudden some days just goes for 25 or 18 and 7?
Yeah.
100%.
Sure.
So if nothing else, it was logical. And that's really all you can ask. And I'm right there with you that with the amount of talent they have accrued in spots you're not supposed to get that much talent in the draft, I am certainly not in any position to be questioning what the Grizzlies are doing right now.
They have found a way to not only hit on the top of the draft, but to hit between 20 and 30 over and over and over again. So, shout out to the Grizzlies. You may continue.
So then, Malachi Branham, that's also a steal for the Spurs. The Spurs had a good night. Christian Braun, that's the one first-round pick I have questions on. To me, that was just too high. I'm not really sure what Denver was doing there.
I followed Denver's. He was the site host for SB Nation, and now he writes for DNVR.com, which is I think just kind of the Denver sports outlet. But when I first followed him, he was just the site manager for the Denver Stiffs. Anyway, they're SB Nation, and now he's the lead Nuggets analyst for DNVR.com. Super cool. Anyways, his name's Ryan Blackburn, and he was going crazy on Twitter. He's like, wait, really, Christian Braun? And then at one point at the end of the first round, it was no way we're about to draft Peyton Watson. No way or like early in the, I think it was whatever their early in the second round pick was. That one. I mean, I like Christian Braun.
Yeah, I do too.
But I didn't, and maybe, right, when you look at the Denver roster,
it's not a terrible fit. It's a good fit. When you're that close and you're the Nuggets, I would like to see you get a little more ambitious. That's how you got Michael Porter Jr.
I mean, but then on the flip side, you think when we're healthy, we're so close. Right. I just want a guy to come in and
play hard, shoot threes, and Christian Braun could do that. Yeah.
But perhaps a little early.
And maybe they just couldn't have traded back the way they wanted to. Now, again, if we're talking about that is my biggest question mark in the first round, that's really saying something about how I feel about this draft.
Right.
Or at least up to that point. Okay. So now we're going to skip ahead to 25 if that's okay. Because I just want to make a point about what started happening here. So Blake Wesley goes at 25. I'm fine with this for the Spurs. Take a swing. He doesn't need to be anything special right away. It's not that I have an issue with that pick. But starting there, then you had Nikola Jovic, Pat Baldwin, and Peyton Watson go in the next 5 picks to close out the first round. And then Caleb Houston went 32. Here were all the players that were still on the board when Caleb Houston went. Christian Koloko, Jaden Hardy, Kennedy Chandler, Bryce McGowan, Ezio Liddell, and Kendall Brown. To me, if you're going to go for a home run, raw potential dude, at that point, you're going for Kendall Brown.
Who the Pacers ended up getting at 48.
Right. And we kind of predicted this beforehand, but he fell precipitously.
Yeah.
To the point that was an excellent pick, because if that dude ever figures it out, he's going to be something fantastic.
Turned the 58th pick into the 48th pick and got a 5-star recruit, or 5-star, former 5-star. Yeah.
Why did we just all of a sudden freak out and start taking every single high upside, high risk player?
Well, let's try to break it down.
Which I absolutely love in defense of Miami. Love the Jovic pick. That was perfect.
I'm so here for Jovic. I'm so here for Jovic.
Really, it's not that I haven't, and Pat Baldwin Jr. to the Warriors, we were talking about this. Makes all the sense in the world. It's not that these picks individually are illogical or don't make sense or I don't like them, with the exception of the Peyton Watson pick. Why did we all of a sudden decide these are players, 25 through 30 on the big boards? And everybody started freaking out because one got picked and we just took all of them. Right? Some of these guys were supposed to go middle of the second round.
Mm-hmm. And then at the expense of guys that were supposed to go much higher than where they ended up.
Right. Which is what I want to talk about. I don't know if you have any more thoughts, but I want to talk about the second round.
Let's move on.
I love talking about second round.
Yeah.
I just have a couple I would like to highlight. So, and also a couple teams.
Mm-hmm.
Pelicans, bravo. Dyson Daniels and EJ Liddell. Phenomenal job.
Yep.
Phenomenal job.
I'm surprised because I think people and maybe NBA teams really looked at what Grant Williams did in the playoffs and realized that after the game 7 in Milwaukee, they were or against Milwaukee, it was wait, he didn't do a darn thing after that. But in terms of a guy that maybe a little undersized, but a guy you're never gonna have to worry about how he's playing, and a guy that hopefully is gonna turn into a 3-point shooter in the NBA because EJ Liddell came back to Ohio State to do just that. I thought EJ Liddell would go a little bit higher than that.
He fell for reasons I will never understand. That's going to be one of the best picks of the draft. Warriors also getting Ryan Rollins in the second round to go with Pat Baldwin. We've talked about this before. It just goes, oh yeah, that makes all the sense in the world. If these guys this next crop ever figured out, those guys are going to be competing for championships for the next decade. It's really kind of scary. And then Hornets, we talked about this a little bit, but very, very good process at the beginning to still end up with Mark Williams. And then you get Bryce McGowan, who I'm a huge fan of in the second round. Yep. Other second round picks. Perhaps my favorite pick of the entire draft, Christian Koloko to the Raptors.
Love that.
Is there a better fit?
I don't think so.
They were screaming.
At least relative to the second round.
Right. They were screaming for somebody tall.
Now, somebody tall.
Now, they got something much more than somebody tall. They got the uber athletic shot blocker who fits perfectly with the roster they have constructed. He is a freak athlete. Every time I watch that Arizona team in general, and Dalen Terry also had his stock rising good for him, going 18 to the Bulls. And Mather and these guys are just terrifyingly athletic. And Koloko is part of that. You put him in there with all those versatile dudes they have, that was just an absolute home run for me. I think I'm in the minority here. Love Max Christie to the Lakers.
I just think picking a guy like Max Christie in the second round is never a bad idea.
Yeah, and I will go back to this. I saw him shut down Johnny Davis. That is a thing that happened. And he is not viewed as an elite defender. Certainly he had some errors and had a lot to learn and could have absolutely used a second year at Michigan State to really clean some things up. And he didn't shoot the ball anywhere near as well as he's capable of.
Right.
Which is why he ended
I was shocked when doing some draft prep that he was only 35 or 6% from 3-point. It might have been worse than that.
I think it was more like 33.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was shocked.
Not atrocious, but not, average for college kind of thing.
Right.
And
I did this moment of wait, am I gonna call Max Christie a good shooter? And I was like, wait, of course I'm gonna call Max Christie a good shooter. Of course.
He's just so smooth. We've talked about this before. We've seen him. So that guy, for a team that needs young players who can shoot and play off of all of these dominant ball handlers they have, he's a perfect fit for them. And I very much believe in his upside. I believe he's going to figure it out, and he's going to be a good NBA player for a long time. And then the other two I had, Kennedy Chandler, we've already kind of talked about this. I would have been more than comfortable drafting at the end of the first round. The Grizzlies got him middle of the second. And Kendall Brown slipping to 48 to go to the Pacers. Those were the second round picks that really stood out to me.
Shouts to... I like Tyrese Barton of the Golden State Warriors at 51. Of course, all of this relatively speaking. And shouts to Hugo Besson, who was at the draft and stayed. You know what? I want to believe that the Bucks picked Hugo Besson
because he was there.
Because he was there. I want to believe that so that guy didn't come all the way from France to go to the draft to not get picked. Maybe that's too much benefit of the doubt. But I would love for that to be the case. They're like, you know what, Hugo? Come on down. You're the next contestant.
Or even more simplistic. All right, it's a draft and stash, fellas.
Yeah.
We're picking some international player. Who we want? Yeah. Oh, Hugo's here? Let's take
him. Yeah. So we don't have to pay for that guy to fly here to see us and send him back. Yeah. Shouts to Hugo.
Hope he has a great NBA career.
Oh, I would love nothing more for Hugo too. CBS Sports gave him an A- for Hugo.
How about that?
I'm not sure you're allowed to give them anything else other than an A. You helped somebody's dream become a reality.
Bravo for the Bucks front office.
Bravo. But yeah, those are the kind of the guys you hit on were the guys I was looking at in the second round. Of course, 30 through 40 are the guys that you're really looking at in terms of, okay, those are guys that at one point or another were talked about potential back end of the first round picks. So on and so forth. I like for the Pacers conversation here.
Yeah, I was going to go back to this too.
Andrew Nembhard being drafted 31st. Why? Because I think they want. I think here's where I've landed on this. I think the Pacers really like what Malcolm Brogdon does on the basketball court when he's on the basketball court.
Yeah.
But he's never on the basketball court.
Right.
And I think Andrew Nembhard is the closest thing to doing what Malcolm Brogdon did.
Sure.
Did you know that the capital of 6'5" guard, the capital of 6'5" guard universe is here in Indianapolis? All of their guards are 6'5".
Yeah.
All of them. I think that's kind of what we're getting at here. I mean, Nembhard, all things considered, is a boring pick at 31. But if the intention, and everybody around here was hoping that Malcolm Brogdon wouldn't be a Pacer by the end of the night. And once you got, I'm sure that they were trying to get somewhere in the 11-12 range, send him to New York, something, and it just didn't happen. I still don't think Malcolm Brogdon is a Pacer when, in October when the season starts. But what I've kind of come down on is the thought process is we like what Malcolm Brogdon does on the floor, and I like what Malcolm Brogdon does on the floor, but Malcolm Brogdon can't stay on the floor. And if you're looking for a guy who can kind of fill that role, he's not going to be completely that. And you can also have the conversation that you just have your backup point guard in TJ McConnell, so why do you need another guy like this when you could go and try to get a guy? I mean, when you look right after anybody else that comes right after him. But if the goal was, we really like what Malcolm Brogdon does, we need to get rid of him and his money and the money that we're paying him. But we kind of like the place that he holds on the team from just a well-roundedness of skills on our team perspective. Then Andrew Nembhard is probably the guy that you're like, okay, which guy in the draft here is going to most emulate that? But if it wasn't that, maybe we'll give the Pacers the benefit of the doubt here. If it wasn't that, then I'm not sure why we're not trying to go after somebody who has a better chance of turning into more of a guy in the NBA.
And this is not me questioning Nembhard, because I am all for taking that guy and letting him find a place in the NBA. He's another one of those guys to me that can very easily carve out a nice career as a backup point guard.
Agreed.
What I want to push back on what you just said is sort of twofold. One, Tyrese Halliburton does a lot of that stuff already.
For the second unit?
No, but you have a guy.
Sure.
And two, yes, in theory, Andrew Nembhard's the closest thing in this draft to Malcolm Brogdon. Andrew Nembhard is nowhere near the defender Malcolm Brogdon is, and Andrew Nembhard is nowhere near the shooter Malcolm Brogdon is. That's my concern, is he is a specialist. Unless he becomes much better at shooting, he needs the ball in his hands. Which means Tyrese Halliburton, or in theory, okay, he's the guy running the second unit.
Mm-hmm.
That could work. At the beginning of the second round, when you are the Pacers, to me, striving for, let's find ourselves an improvement at backup point guard who we know is going to be limited in what he does when we already have a more than capable backup point guard. With that being...
This is just you being a TJ McConnell fan.
That's part of it.
Okay, so...
so go swing for somebody, please.
For who?
I mean, I would have taken Max Christie. I will always see there's value in Christian Koloko, especially if you're going to trade Miles Turner. Now, if you're not going to trade Miles Turner, okay, that's a lot of big guys who block shots.
Uh-huh.
And Christian Koloko does not have Miles Turner's offensive game. Or even, and that's the place where I would have been okay taking a swing on somebody. Any of these guys who then started falling, would have loved to see E.J. Liddell, would have been okay taking Kendall Brown there. If you wanted the backup point guard, Kennedy Chandler gives you something different.
Mm-hmm.
the idea of having, and I mean, yeah, I guess you just keep Halliburton and Nembhard separate. I just wanted to see a little more ambition because I just don't see Andrew Nembhard as a primary playmaker, a guy that carries a second unit. Would you agree with that? He may be the primary ball handler, but a guy who actually carries a unit. The way you say Jalen Brunson can.
No, I also don't think it's fair to compare any backup point guard in the NBA
Right,
to Jalen Brunson
right.
at this point. But
And my point is, Jalen Brunson was drafted later than Andrew Nembhard was.
sure.
When you are a team desperately in need of talent and trying to sort of raise the bar, and you feel good about what you did earlier in this draft, and they did end up taking the swing at Kendall Brown later, which I appreciate. There were so many players. I guess this is what it comes down to: is you had your pick because all of these guys started dropping because we started going for all of these home runs. Now there were still a couple on the board you could have taken if you wanted to. But all of these teams that could have taken the guys who were supposed to go at the end, even David Roddy opened up a spot because he wasn't supposed to go that high. Peyton Watson wasn't supposed to go in the first round. That's another spot. So you had your E.J. Liddells and Kennedy Chandlers, and you can go down the list of all of these guys falling. And they took a guy that to me you could have gotten 10 to 15 picks later.
I think, and as the guy who cuts up audio for literally every Pacers prospect and has heard what the front office has said about every pick that they've brought in, I think that perhaps outside of Mathurin, in the context that Andrew Nembhard did the best workout that the Pacers brought in over the last month or so. And maybe it's as simple as that, because while you should always have some hesitations about what you see in a 40-minute workout compared to what you've seen the guy do for years, that's certainly a thing to take into consideration.
Yeah.
But maybe it just is, the guys on our board, we're looking for very small things we weren't all that interested in draft. And maybe the Pacers didn't want to draft for potential there. Maybe they wanted a guy that they wanted to be productive.
And it does give you 2 ball handlers you can separate if you trade Brogdon stuff.
Right.
Well, the 3 if you throw McConnell in
Right.
there. My thing is just he can't play off the ball.
At least not yet.
Yeah, and maybe and this is not an Andrew Nembhard thing. If he would have had a home, for example, if the Mavericks would have drafted him knowing they're losing Jalen Brunson, would have loved it. Couldn't have said enough good things about that. You just keep him separate from Luka and it's phenomenal. The Pacers didn't need that. There wasn't this glaring hole at backup point guard.
Sure.
And now you have 2 guys whose game is predicated on having the ball in their hands. So a best case scenario is he's your 6th man. Because you can't play him with Halliburton.
My only pushback would be is that he looked pretty darn good next to Jalen Suggs and Gonzaga for a year.
It's a fair point.
Now, I'm not going to
throw
that at you tied to a brick, but
and I would say it's a different world than the NBA.
That is I wholeheartedly agree with that. But he did play next to a guy who needed the ball in his hands more than him, and it wasn't like we didn't spend all that year thinking, man, I wish Nembhard could do more off the ball.
Yeah. Now they did stagger those minutes a lot.
Sure. And he did come off the bench.
Yeah.
But if it means that they stagger the minutes with Halliburton a lot and he comes off the bench, then maybe that's what they're doing.
Yeah. Now my question is just why do you have to TJ McConnell like that? TJ McConnell's earned more respect. that is part of this. Sure. That high in the draft with that many good players available, I just didn't get it.
Yeah.
But if these are the holes we're picking, there wasn't anything I was going, I don't know about that one. I don't like that. That's a disaster.